Unsolved homicides, suspects on the run, detectives wading through mystery, families waiting for closure. We've covered it all this year on Unsolved Central Texas. We set out to get a look inside ongoing criminal investigations in our area. Cases without answers, cases gone cold. From the detectives following leads for years, to family members trying to honor the memory of their lost loved ones, to experts in laboratories studying everything from DNA evidence to time of death, to our very own KXAN reporters following every new detail. Each week, we sit down with someone new to learn more. But it all started with the head of the Unsolved Crimes Investigations Division of the state's leading law enforcement agency, the Texas Rangers. Here's a part of that conversation.
Remember too, DNA is just a tool, right? There's all sorts of tools in investigations. The cell phones, that information, there's the analytical work where you're researching people, those databases. And so DNA is a tool for investigations. The issue is when you have an investigation and it's an unknown DNA. So you got to get that DNA identified. And it might not be the suspect, right? And so you got to keep that in mind. You still have to do your due diligence and investigate that case. If I shake your hand or gave you a hug, then my DNA is on you, something happens, why is my DNA on you? Did I commit the crime? It might be there inadvertently or consensual, some type of contact to that. Why is that DNA there? And so you got to have it identified, and then you got to figure out why. Right? Just because you got it identified, that doesn't mean that's going to be your actor.
With the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or really any cold case, I mean, these are such sensitive cases, the loss of life or sexual assault.
Yes.
Talk about that piece of this. It's not just the science of it or the investigatory aspect, but you're often dealing with victims and families who have had the worst days of their lives.
Yes.
I imagine that can be difficult.
It is. Normally, when I was going to crime scenes, active crime scenes, I would always say a prayer for the victim and their families, and then ask God, to give me the knowledge to do my job, but knowing, pray for them and to allow me to continue and help them out. So, yeah, it's a touchy subject, and a lot of these cases they stick with you, especially if they're unsolved.
With the context from the Texas Rangers to set the stage for what investigating cold cases is like across the state, we started digging into case files. For our first, we went back to Lakeway in the 1980s when a wife, mother, and soon-to-be grandmother was shot and killed. She was found in the trunk of her own car miles away from home. This year, new search warrants filed by law enforcement and discovered by KXAN investigators point to a possible breakthrough in this case. We sat down with the Lakeway police detective about the latest on the murder of Betty Thomas.
This is one of those truly kind of whodunit cases. There were no real known enemies to Miss Thomas. Again, she led a pretty quiet life for the most part. Along the way, there were suggestions from the public and from other people within each of the families that it might have something to do with this or it might have something to do with that. But we never, at least in the 80s when this happened, they never really formally solidified any of those theories. It just, none of the things lined up. Again, you look for a relationship between the victim and a spouse, right? And you look at again, a potentially a robbery or burglary scene, but along each one of those theories, there were discrepancies that didn't line up, that don't line up to this day. So trying to piece all those things together, again, even today, we keep our focus wide open because we don't know. We don't know until we get that final piece of evidence that ties it all in together. Then we start building that theory based on the physical evidence.
Earlier this summer, in fact, just a few months ago, KXAN investigators dug up some court records that revealed there's some new progress on this case. We learned that there were 2 search warrants filed seeking DNA samples such as blood or saliva from 2 specific men. According to those records, new testing done this year identified that those 2 men might match some fingerprints that were lifted from the original scene. Talk about these developments to the extent that you can this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the development of new technology, right? So also in addition to DNA, there are advances in technology in other fields such as fingerprinting. So essentially what we found out is the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab submitted the fingerprints that were taken back in 1988. And because of new technology, they were actually able to match those prints to these 2 people. Leading up to this point, those people were not, had never been identified in this case. So their involvement or the role in the case remains unclear. So that being said, when you have those fingerprints and you have this unknown DNA profile, the thought was to get those people's DNA to compare it to the DNA sample that we found at the scene to see if there are any, correlations there. So those processes, those testing procedures are still underway now.
In October, Austin police announced their investigation into the death of a young man named Christian Rangel was still open and active, despite a woman pleading guilty to a charge of tampering with human remains in this case. For our next episode, we sat down with KXAN's public safety reporter Bree Hollis to explain.
April 8th, the day of the eclipse, it was kind of a situation where everyone knew where they were that day, and that's gonna, come into play later. We'll bring that up. But Christian was last seen at a Walmart on that day, and then his body was found 11 days later nearby at alongside Barton Creek.
We know that police were originally investigating this as a death investigation. They later began a homicide investigation. So explain what we know from police about how that transpired.
Yeah, so he was found, or last seen on April 8th, and body found 11 days later. So it took a little bit of time to actually gather that forensic evidence, if you can imagine. So sometime in July, police ended up determining that there was physical evidence that some kind of attack had occurred.
Around that same time is when police were also releasing some video evidence, which we'll put up here on the screen. But some of the video evidence actually from that Walmart store started to help them piece together some clues about what might have happened that day.
Yes, so that video shows Christian Rangel getting into a car in the parking lot. It also later shows that car speeding off, and police say there was a point where it looked like he was trying to get out of the car. Police ultimately determined that that vehicle belonged to the defendant, in this case, Camry Wooldridge, and they also had determined that Wooldridge had disposed of the body near the creek, but that was it. That was kind of the extent of the evidence they had. There was nothing else particularly piecing anything together about an actual attack or anything.
So enough evidence to charge her with tampering with a body.
Exactly.
But not to make that leap to a murder charge.
Correct, that's exactly right.
Next, we got to look inside the multi-agency task force searching for a murder suspect who is believed to have left town days before his trial. Kevin Michael Wagaspak is accused of killing his girlfriend, Catherine Dyer, back in 2015. APD detectives and the U.S. Marshals detail what it takes to hunt fugitives like Wagaspak.
For hunting fugitives, you need to know everything about their life, because that's typically what people are going to continue doing while they're on the run, but just in a different way. So they're still going to try and, keep connections with family, friends, use those as resources to, help their flight, stay under the radar, like, okay, I'm gonna go hide out with my friend, or I'm gonna go hide out with my brother, my sister, things like that.
Because our specific job is under the executive branch, where we totally go after and enforce, execute that warrant that is written by some judge, and it's our job to really execute that warrant and return it. And we don't like to return it unexecuted, meaning we didn't find that individual. We like to return it executed, meaning that person is in custody and waiting extradition or awaiting further judicial proceedings there at that original, with that original agency or county or something like that.
And how close do you think you are to bringing that day in court to friends and family of Catherine's?
We're closer than we were a year ago. There are several of us that have spent countless hours working on it, but we still don't have a definitive idea of where he's at. We have some ideas of where we think he is, but there's still a lot of work left to be done, and I'm hoping things like this will prompt people that may have heard or seen something, just the smallest little detail will bring them forward. It may not seem important to them, but it's a very important detail that might lead us to where we need to go.
This Halloween marked 46 years since a young woman was found in a ditch along Interstate 35 near Georgetown, wearing nothing but a pair of orange socks. With no other way to identify her, she became known as Orange Socks to investigators. That is until a major breakthrough in 2019 when they identified her as Deborah Jackson. We sat down with the Williamson County detective who inherited this case and why he says twists and turns over the years, including a potentially false confession, have not deterred their investigation.
I can't say that he was for sure not involved in it. He obviously was. He was convicted of it, and he did confess to it. There are some very conflicting things with his confession. I would say until we were able to link somebody 100% and say that another person did it, that I would never say for 100% certainty that Henry Lee Lucas did not do it.
We want to fast forward several decades. A major breakthrough a few years ago by your agency, investigators were able to finally put a name to the face. Mm-hmm. Before that announcement, we had seen several sketches released over the years as your agency and other law enforcement were trying to understand who this woman is. So I think we have some of those sketches there. Tell us a little bit about the role of sketches in trying to identify whether it's a suspect or, in this case, a victim.
So the sketch would play, and did play in this case, a huge role because we obviously can't release the photos of her face from the crime scene. We wouldn't ever do that, just out of respect for her family and her as well. But the sketch, in our case, played a huge role in identifying her because one of her family members saw the sketch and thought they recognized that sketch as their sister. And they called in. We ultimately ended up getting that person's DNA, comparing it to the DNA obtained from our victim's body, and we found out that they were a familial match.
What is that moment like, hearing from a family member who after all these years thinks, that's my sister, that's my family member?
That was huge. It was a huge moment to get her identified. It was some folks that worked on this case before me. We haven't stopped working this case because just because we had someone confess to it and been convicted to it, or have been convicted for it. We want to find the 100% truth, and we haven't wrote it off just because there's still someone that stands convicted for it. We want to find out what actually happened. We want to find out who killed her, and if it was Henry Lee, then we could, prove that and be done with it. But we do believe there's a lot of conflicting information with his confession. We are aware of that. We are still working it. It's an active case. We work it all the time with the other cold cases we have, and any information that anyone has that they might think is very minute to them may be key to helping us solve it.
Some unsolved cases aren't that far back in the archives. In fact, we sat down with Austin Police about a series of different cases from 2022 they say are in need of public attention. For example, APD is still working to identify who stabbed DeAndre Day in downtown Austin one weekend night during September of that year. Questions linger despite cameras rolling on the moments leading up to this deadly fight. It's a case the lead detective says keeps him up at night. Part of this altercation may have been that DeAndre was trying to protect his friend.
That's absolutely right. Actually, DeAndre's last act was protecting his friend. So the gentleman that pulled out the knife, say gentleman loosely, our suspect in this case, which is going to be a black male, appears to be a black male with dreadlocks, pulled out a knife on DeAndre. DeAndre ran away. As he's running away, the gentleman with the knife then went after his friend. And DeAndre went to his friend's aid to try to help him so that he wouldn't be stabbed. And in the process of that, got stabbed. So DeAndre's last act was saving his friend's life. I mean, the biggest obstacle we have in this case is just nobody is able to identify these three people, and we don't have anything. We don't have fingerprints that are usable. We are still following up on DNA, and I believe it's possible we may get something. Unfortunately, you just never know until you get the DNA results back. So there's a good chance that we're going to have something workable, but there's a good chance we may not. So I don't want to put all my eggs in the DNA basket. We may not have anything to work with. So if there's somebody out there that has information, DeAndre had a ton of friends, and if some friends have heard things, if one of these gentlemen that we're looking to talk to that were involved in this deal, if they see this, we need to talk to you. And eventually we're going to identify them. The best thing that could happen is for them to come down and talk to us.
Just a month prior, in August of 2022, images of crime scene tape up near Barton Springs and Zilker Park grabbed Austin's attention. Even now, Austin police are still working to find clues to who killed Camnick Campbell in the parking lot of the pool. We got the chance to sit down with those investigators, as well as with Camnick's mother, who's working to try to keep his memory and this case alive. She opened up about what her grief and her hope looks like.
You know, there have been some rough days. However, they're better now. These days are better than those first days. I've had to learn to wait patiently, which is something that I didn't know that I didn't do before. But I trust God. I trust God for a miracle. I believe the word of God. And when it says that if you have faith of a mustard seed, then you can tell this mountain to move and it will move. I believe in miracles. And us not knowing who murdered Camnick, that is a mountain that I believe God will move for me. And I do believe that it'll be a miracle because, you know, there was no lighting out there, no one to really say, oh, I saw this person do it. You know, I tried to play, mama detective to look to see who could anybody have seen this. And so when this gets solved, it will truly be a miracle. But I believe in miracles, and I believe it's happening. It will happen.
Unfortunately, that area, especially that time of day, it's very poorly lit. It's hard to see anything in that area. And so for us to be able to get a good suspect description, it was very difficult.
We have been receiving tips over the course of these 3 years, some of them pretty recent tips. The problem with the way that these tips are coming in is they're through Crime Stoppers, and even though we can request contact from the tipster, they don't always, maybe they're not getting the request or they're choosing not to. In the instance of the last two or three tips that we've received, we really need to talk to that tipster. We feel like the information is solid enough to where we need to talk to them. We think that it could make a difference in this case. There's always a witness. There's even if it's 3 or 4 hours later they hear someone talking about it or whatever. Think about how you would feel if this victim was your family member. You would want that information to get out there. I would hope that if there's someone out there that's watching this that knows anything about this, I don't care how small of a detail it is, if they could just get a hold of us and let us know so we can work it. We owe it to the family. We owe it to Kamnick to solve this homicide.
Another heartbroken mother lost her son earlier that same year. We spoke to her on our show. Plus, on our show, police revealed this new video to the public showing Corey Arizmendez in the hours leading up to his death before he was found lying in a residential street in the South Congress neighborhood. APD says the 35-year-old had been shot. But since then, they've struggled to unearth more details about who did this or why. They say they want to talk to the people he's seen interacting with in this footage to try to get to the bottom of it.
Obviously, we start at the neighborhood, right, where we found him. Ring camera footage, garage camera footage. And one of the problems that we have in many cases is those cameras just don't extend out into the roadway. People tend to make their settings so that those cameras are only activated when someone steps onto their driveway or up to their front porch. And so then we start extending out from there. And with the help of Cap Metro, we were able to obtain some video of the bus, the Halo cameras downtown. There's other places that we got some video from to try and somehow piece together a timeline where what Corey was doing the night he was killed.
Typically, cases are solved sooner than 3 years, and I wish that I could have solved this case a lot faster for the family, but unfortunately I haven't. We haven't, but we haven't given up hope, and we are still actively trying to get this solved.
Life is before and after. Anything that we see, anything I see, with an anniversary coming up, oh, that's 2 years after Corey died. Oh, that was a year before he died. Oh, that's 6 months before his birthday. Everything now relates back to that day, which tilted our world. And I've never lived the same life again. I've lost who I was, and I'm trying to be a good person now for him, his kids, my grandkids. I'm trying really hard to hang on. I want a place. I need faces, names to put that anger towards so that I can forgive. I don't even know who to forgive right now. And I can't forgive myself because I failed him. I failed to bring him home.
By Thanksgiving, the holiday marked 4 years since the murder of George Michael Lopez. He was shot and killed while driving on that evening in 2021. APD cold case investigators explain how this case landed in their office, saying the case is far from cold.
Like everybody works cases differently. Everybody works cases from different angles. They all have their strengths and weaknesses as investigators. So having another set of eyes, of course, helps. As a cold case investigator, I'm not driven by an active homicide. It's not fresh. It's a cold case. So we don't have the same timeline. We don't have the same deadline as a more active homicide case or a homicide investigator would have.
Kind of allows you to take a different position when you're looking at evidence and things like that.
Yes.
In this case in particular, the timing of it being on the holiday, I can imagine that's just heartbreaking for family. And then to come up on another Thanksgiving without their loved one. If you're able to share what conversations with family have been like over the years as this investigation has continued.
This is, in the cold case unit, we have family members that reach out at different time periods to investigators to ask or inquire if their family member's case is still being investigated. We have cases that are 40 plus years old that we don't ever get contact from family member to see if there's follow-up. But this case, there is frequent contact from the family to make sure that this case hasn't been shelved. It's not just a box, as some of the victims refer to cold cases. This case is still active. This case is still being worked, and the family does inquire about this case rather frequently.
On Unsolved Central Texas, we hope to not only tell you about specific cases that need to be solved, but also trends, issues, and research relating to the investigation of crimes. It's why we spoke with a Texas researcher who's using an unexpected method to assist on hundreds of criminal investigations. Texas A&M professor and entomologist Dr. Jeff Tomberlin explained how the life cycle of insects can help investigators unearth key details in a case. Explain the basics for people. How do you use this kind of science to aid in criminal investigations?
Sure. So I'm an entomologist by training, so I study insects, and my research program is decomposition ecology. So how do things rot and how are nutrients cycled? So the more we understand about that process, and we gain precision in predicting outcomes or how things start is really important. So when an individual dies, the remains become exposed to the environment, and that means there are organisms in the environment that will want to consume those remains. And what I'm really interested in is what drives the attraction and colonization of those bodies by insects. And if we can understand that process, then we can estimate how long the insects have been associated with the remains, which can be viewed in most cases as a minimum postmortem interval. So we just really try to help investigators get a greater appreciation of the decomposition process and how that information can really be important in deciphering what happened to them and who might be responsible for it.
And from the evidence room to the courtroom, a convicted killer has had to name his co-conspirator as a part of a plea deal in the death of a young University of Texas at Austin nursing student more than 4 decades ago. We sat down with KXAN reporter and anchor Jayla Washington, who relayed the emotional moments when Deck Brewer Jr. came face to face with the family of his victim, Susan Lee Wolf. She also outlined in this episode what is next for the ongoing investigation into her murder. The court hearing that you sat in on was his sentencing hearing. So talk about that day. What was it like when Brewer came into the courtroom?
What was striking to me is he was wheeled into the courtroom. So he has stage 4 cancer. And, you know, he still had the shackles that were around his feet. You could kind of hear the shackles rumbling as he was wheeled in. But obviously Susan's family was in the courtroom as well, and they were very emotional as they watched him get wheeled in. Mind you, this is not the first time that they have seen him, but this was a big moment where they were able to sort of get a sense of closure when it came to how long he would spend behind bars and, you know, sort of what was going to happen next in their healing phase after they've waited for this moment for so long. I mean, like you said, this is back in the 80s, and to have to go all of this time and finally get some closure on what was a cold case that now came to the ending that we saw a couple of weeks ago. It was really emotional and really heavy for her family as they sort of just prepared themselves for what he was going to say when, as a part of that deal that he took, he had to give more details regarding what exactly happened. I'd actually had a long conversation on the phone with Susan's stepsister after this sentencing, and she was just, you know, saying all of the hurdles they had to jump through, and even with the DNA evidence and all of these years later having to just really, for all of the stars to have to align to get to this point. So they really want other families who might have cold cases, similar or unrelated, just cold cases in general, to know what they can do to advocate for themselves. So that's a big piece for the family moving forward while they wait to see what happens as that legal process continues to play out.
Threads of hope in the face of heartbreak. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey this year. You can catch up on all of these conversations on our streaming app, KXAN Plus, and on our website, KXAN.com. We will work to continue to spotlight more of these cases in the new year. See you then.